shot her the first time, I believe, was pretty much holding the gun straight at her at this type of an angle, where it hits here, comes out here, then she falls forward. So the back of the head is no longer exposed to the shooter, but the side of the neck is. Then I believe that the shooter at that point came and stuck the gun into a loose contact. That means that the person stuck his hand inside the gun, inside the car, and had the barrel of the gun in contact, loosely in contact with the skin, and fired.
We'll have coverage of opening statements and the first witnesses in this capital case later in the program. And now to the Simpson trial. Were there two police crime represents, and that's so serious, and because the work of the tens of thousands of other honorable police officers in this country depends so much on the goodwill of their communities, goodwill which is poisoned when a cop goes bad. And that point may bear some emphasizing, especially as the Simpson trial has raised the specter of racism and criminality among some police officers so sharply. The vast majority of police officers in the country obviously work hard and decently to discharge their duty to protect and serve the rest of us. But police forces, like all institutions, are made up of all kinds of people, and as Greg Jarrett reports here, the question in the case of Georgia versus Michael Chappell is, did one officer in the Gwinnett County Police Department turn to murder?
I just can't believe it all happened the way it did.
That was the reaction of Emma Jean Thompson's son to his mother's death. Thompson lives simply in this trailer in Sugar Hill, Georgia, a community in the Atlanta suburbs.
Type of person who was always there. She always stayed at home. Never hardly went anywhere. You know, I guess just a homebody.
In March of 1993, Thompson received an insurance payment of $14,000. A few weeks later, about half of it was stolen. And so began a chain of events culminating in Thompson's murder.
About 2.5 weeks prior to her death, her trailer was broken into. And Michael Chappell came over to get the report on the money that was stolen.
Chappell, however, never filed a police report. And then, according to police, Thompson told a friend she got a call from Chappell claiming to have found some of her money, and he wanted to meet with her to compare serial numbers. And so, 12 days after reporting the theft to Gwinnett County Police Officer Michael Chappell, Thompson was found slumped over in her car in this muffler shop driveway.
She had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Her purse, which was believed to have contained a large amount of money, was missing.
Rather than boasting about their record, protecting and serving the Gwinnett County community, Police Chief Wayne Bolden was forced to admit that one of his own allegedly had gone bad.
Yesterday, we had a witness who saw that police officer, at the door and the window of that car, and that witness has positively identified Officer Chappell from a photo lineup.
On April 24, 1993, just 9 days after the killing, Michael Chappell, an 8-year veteran of the police force, was arrested and charged with the murder and robbery of Emma Jean Thompson.
You know, every time I see a police chief up here holding one of these type of press conferences, and I guess I've just always, you know, prayed to God it wouldn't be me. But unfortunately, my prayers failed today.
More than 2 years after Thompson's death, Chappell maintains his innocence.
Well, we're saying he's not guilty, and we feel like the state has stretched their case, and it's not as strong as they lead you to believe.
Chappell insists they have the wrong man. Nevertheless, prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. And now it's up to a jury to decide whether Michael Chappell will live or die. In the mind of the victim's son, however, that decision would be easy.
I'd probably send him to the chair because it's not right to do something like that to somebody who was so nice, you know, never done anything to anybody.
Greg Jarrett, Court TV.
Court TV's Jane Okrasinski is covering this trial for us, and she joins us now from Lawrenceville. Jane, opening statements today. What did the prosecutor emphasize in the state's case to the jury today?
The prosecutor, Danny Porter, emphasized just the wide range of very compelling circumstantial evidence against this defendant. The fact that there were people who saw a police car in the driveway where the body was found at the night the murder occurred. The fact that Michael Chappell, who was in financial straits before the murder, after the murder, is paying for things with $100 bills when that's what Ms. Thompson was known to carry. The fact that his police issue rain jacket had high velocity human blood spatter on one arm of the coat. Evidence after evidence after evidence, culminating with some DNA evidence. The state claims that it has a DNA match with blood stains found in Chappell's patrol car to the victim.
As you point out, it is a circumstantial case. And so what is the defense in this murder trial doing with the state's circumstantial evidence?
Well, first of all, they say just because it was a police officer, apparently, doesn't mean it was this police officer. And that eyewitness that the state is talking about that they have, who they say identified this police officer, was only shown a photo of one police officer in the photo array. They say he also said it could have been another police officer whose picture they showed him, a police officer who committed suicide shortly after Michael Chappell was arrested. They say the DNA sample was poor quality, that it was small, and that the test results are interpreted one way by the state's scientists, another way by scientists for the defense.
It is a capital murder case, Jane. The state's seeking the death penalty here. Tell us a little bit about how that works in Georgia.
Well, in Georgia, like many other states, has a bifurcated capital trial procedure. First, the jury hears evidence on guilt or innocence. They will then retire to deliberate. If they come back with a guilty verdict on either malice murder or felony murder, they then will go back, be presented with additional evidence in aggravation by the state or in mitigation by the defense. Will go back and deliberate again and come back with a recommendation of life or death. That is, in Georgia, a binding recommendation and must be a unanimous recommendation by the jury.
And this trial moving at a pretty good clip already, Jane. How many witnesses today, and what did the jury hear?
Well, we heard 11 witnesses today from the state. We heard the two men who discovered Imogene Thompson's body on the morning of April 16th, 1993. We heard from the police officer who was first on the scene, all of them testifying about the position of the car in the driveway, the position of the body in the car. We then heard from a medical examiner's investigator and the medical examiner about the findings of the autopsy, about the gunshot wounds to Ms. Thompson's head, about the collection of the blood sample that was later used for the DNA test. And then we heard from a series of witnesses who were located by police in the days after the murder, who had driven past the scene the night when the killing occurred, and who saw a police car in the driveway of that muffler shop around the time that the state believes that Imogene Thompson was killed.
All right, Jane Okersinski, thanks for that report. We'll have more coverage of opening statements and the first witnesses in this case a little later in the program. Up next, however, we'll begin our extended coverage of the day in the trial of O.J. Simpson with the first witness on the stand, Christian Reichardt, Faye Resnick's former boyfriend. Seeking the death penalty, and it is a particularly painful kind of case in a civic sense because the defendant and the man that the state says committed this capital murder is a former police officer. Michael Chappell was with the Gwinnett County Police Department for 8 years until April of 1993. Early that month, he responded to a burglary call from Imogene Thompson. She lived in a trailer park outside of Atlanta, about 25 miles outside of Atlanta, and she had about $14,000 in cash in her possession, which she'd received in the insurance proceeds of a friend who had left it to her. She reported to Officer Chappell that about $7,000 of that money had been stolen, and he left after talking with her a little bit, never filed a report. 12 days later, she ended up dead, found shot to death in the parking lot of a muffler company down in Gwinnett County, Georgia. Michael Chappell was questioned by police. They found blood in his car. They discovered that, according to them, he does not have an alibi, and they charged him with this murder. A key point in this case, and an increasingly familiar one in many cases, is DNA evidence. That blood in the officer's patrol car was tested, and there was a genetic match made to the blood of the victim. Well, DNA, as you certainly know if you've been following the Simpson case, is a daunting subject, but today we saw really a first-rate job of explaining it to the jurors right off the bat in opening statements by the prosecutor, Daniel Porter, who is the Gwinnett County District Attorney. And we're going to play you now the part of his opening statement where he introduces jurors to the concept of DNA testing and what it can prove for the state in this case.
You'll learn that DNA is essentially the cornerstone of life. It is a cellular matrix consisting basically of 4 parts, which are joined like the links of a puzzle and can only join one way. Each of us are different because they join in different sequences. And that's what makes me, me, and you, you. And it is this sequence that is then tested. It's tested first by, once the DNA material is removed, it's cut chemically through the use of an enzyme called a restriction enzyme. And what that does is take the strands of DNA and separate it along certain points into strands of varying lengths. Those links are then placed in a gel and through a process called electrophoresis. They are chemically and electrically excited and they move through the gel for a certain distance depending on their length. Then they are locked in place through a process called southern bonding, which is the use of a nylon membrane that locks the question sample into place. Then once the question sample has been locked onto the membrane, it's compared against what are called probes. Probes are nothing more or less than genetic yardsticks. They measure the length of the genetic material that's been cut previously. As each probe is put against the question material and the known material, comparisons are made. The more probes that are compared, the narrower the chances become of what's called a random match. And these terms will all be explained. In this case, 6 probes were compared to both the blood of Michael Chappell and the blood of Emma Jean Thompson. 6 yardsticks against the DNA material that was found on the seat. The results of those tests were that each of the 6 probes matched the blood of Emma Jean Thompson. Once the match is made or determined by trained technicians who are experienced in this matter, it's reviewed by a computer. And the computer makes a second comparison under the control of the technicians. The control of the computer, in this case, confirmed the results of the technicians. And again, the 6 probe match was found from the seat of Michael Chappell's patrol car to the blood of Emma Jean Thompson. Once the examination is made, there is what's called a population frequency estimate done, which is basically done by multiplying the likelihood of the occurrence of each probe. Because the probes, they don't measure hair color or eye color or anything else. They're just places on the DNA. And they occur with certain frequency in populations. And when you take all the 6 probes and you multiply the frequency of the occurrence of each probe, you end up in this case with a scientific conclusion that the likelihood that the blood on the seat is not Emma Jean Thompson's is 1 in excess of 10 billion, which is more than twice the population of the planet.
Clarity from prosecutor Daniel Porter in laying out how DNA testing works in his opening statement, preparing the jurors for what they will hear in this case, but doing it at a very clear level with great dramatic emphasis as well, telling them what the DNA evidence in this case might prove if they buy it. When we come back, however, we'll hear the opening statement of the defense lawyer as he says there's another side to this story, that there was, in this case, a mistake made. There was perhaps a policeman involved, but it wasn't Michael Chappell.
It's where the state wants you to believe that they've got all this solid, ironclad evidence, the way Mr. Porter describes it. The truth is, this case was built up from the beginning on probabilities, suspicion, thinks, and guesses, and gossip. Mr. Porter's going to present gossip to you, too, to try to convince you that Mike Chappell's guilty. Mike Chappell had the misfortune, as a dedicated police officer, to answer a call to Ms. Thompson's residence on April 3rd, 1993. He found a mother, a distraught mother, who wanted desperately to believe that her son had not taken her money. She took him to the back door and she pointed and said, "Here's where somebody cut the screen." He talked to her, she showed him her money, and she showed him that she only had $7,000 left. She told him there's $14,000 to begin with. Officer Chappell told her, "Ma'am, you don't have a burglar. Burglars don't take half your money. Your son, who has problems, took your money. If you wish me to prosecute, I'll do so. That's my job as a police officer." She did not wish to prosecute. Officer Chappell did not write a report. He felt the incident didn't deserve a report. There was nobody wanted to prosecute. The mother didn't want him to. He mentioned the call, though, to his sergeant, Sergeant Stone. And I believe the evidence will show that Sergeant Stone recommended that he write a report. He never did. She called him back once or twice about the money the evidence was going to show. And he attempted to do some things to perhaps make her son own up and say that he took the money. Everybody knew, including the mother, she didn't want to believe it, that no burglar takes half of your money when you got $14,000 in cash. Everybody knows that. After the murder, immediately, Mike Chappell went forward to his supervisor, Sergeant Stone, and reminded him that I was out there on that call. He did not attempt to hide it. He in no way attempted at any time to hide the fact that he was out there on that call. Now, the police, on the other hand, the evidence is going to show that on the night of Ms. Thompson's murder, the police were doing what they shouldn't have been doing, including Mike Chappell. They were not doing what they're paid to do. There was thunderstorms that night, bad storms, so they decided to all go up to the fire station up at the North Side Precinct and sit at the fire station and watch TV. And Mike Chappell, Sergeant Stone, and Brian Reddy, a police officer, were all sitting up at the fire station watching TV that night till about 10 o'clock. They left about 10 o'clock. The evidence will show that Mike Chappell got a call. He responded to that call in a timely manner. In the period of time between the time he responded to that call and the time that the state says Ms. Thompson was killed, the state contends that he drove down, stopped Ms. Thompson, killed her, and then went to his call, all in a timely manner. Now, the Gwinnett County Police Department made a serious error of judgment, I think, in this case. They elected to investigate this case themselves. They knew, as Mr. Porter said, by the second day that a Gwinnett County police car was involved. There were too many witnesses that seen a police car parked out there on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard. Instead of calling in an outside independent agency, they undertook to investigate themselves. They, in fact, put people in there that were friends. They put people in there that perhaps was a person who committed the crime to conduct the investigation.
So you see defense lawyer Johnny Moore there not only trying to tell the jurors that they should keep an open mind about his client, but even pointing the finger in a different direction, that there could have been someone else, another person in the police department involved. Brian Neer, let me first ask you about the prosecutor's opening statement, the portion we saw, the DNA evidence that he discussed. It's got to be a challenge for a lawyer on either side to deal with something as complicated as that. How do you think he did with this?
Opening statements are a preview. They preview the issues, what the case is about, and those things that may be troublesome that the jury really has to understand. And Prosecutor Porter took the time to talk about DNA. Now, we've heard a lot about DNA over the last several months, almost to the point we probably don't want to hear much more about it. But I'm not sure we understand much more about it. And that's really the critical issue. It's not that a jury would be less than intelligent because it doesn't accept DNA, but it is not a science. We don't live in the molecular world, and it is not a science that we are used to. So what Prosecutor Porter here did was attempt to explain in layman-like terms, using words like yardstick and using membrane, to explain what might become complicated, to give them kind of a roadmap. Here it goes. We talked about it at Jurassic Park, those little characters that came out and tried to explain why the dinosaurs came what they were. Pure fiction, but the fiction explained the science. It's a little bit of drama and a little bit of education.
You know, could you put on a cartoon like that if you're a lawyer?
Well,
make one and say, here's how DNA works, and have little Johnny DNA running around?
It could be. It may be seen looking down at the jurors, but it would sure as heck show the point of teaching. You know, the great teachers not only make it understandable, but they make it fun because it makes an impression upon them. And Prosecutor Porter did, I think, a great job in saying, here it comes, and this is what you've got to remember. And without the need for Dr. Bruce Weir, he was able to get to the point where he said 1 out of 10 billion, which is twice the population of the planet.
Pretty powerful evidence. Well, we're going to come back and hear some of the witnesses in this case. These are some of the eyewitnesses, not to the crime, but to something around the crime. These people saw a police car near where Emma Jean Thompson's body was found.
Sitting there.
Okay. Can you describe the car as best you recall it?
It was white with a fluorescent yellow stripe.
Did you notice whether or not headlights were on the vehicle?
I believe they were.
Were you able to see anyone in the car?
I didn't notice anybody, but I didn't look either.
To the best of your recollection, where was the car located?
I think it was sitting in the driveway of the muffler shop, facing the street.
All right, it was facing the street?
Yes.
All right. If you would, please step down to the diagram that we have down here on the easel. The jury's already been informed that this is a scale model of the muffler shop, the parking lot, the driveway, and the access from the driveway onto Peachtree Industrial Boulevard. If you would, understanding that the car itself is not to scale, please take that white car at the bottom of the diagram and place it on the diagram where your best recollection is you saw the police car that night.
There, I believe.
All right, and it was facing Peachtree Industrial Boulevard. Yes. All right, if you would, please resume your stand. Do you recall what you thought about as you drove by Winco Muffler Shop that night and saw the police car?
As we drove by, my little sister made the comment that the policeman wasn't hiding very well.
Was that, well, did you take that to mean something to do with the fact that he might be out there trying to catch speeders, that
Yes,
sort of
sir.
thing? Did that enter your mind?
Yes, sir.
Did you own a...
So Ed Schmansky telling the jurors what he saw the night of the killing of Emma Jean Thompson, a police car parked right where her body was found. Marianne Johnsa was coming home from a Jehovah's Witness meeting with her son, daughter, and her grandson, and she tells the jurors what she saw at that same location.
Did you see anything when you approached Winco Muffler that evening?
Yes, I saw a police car in the driveway of the Glencoe Muffler establishment, and he was facing toward Peachtree Industrial.
What color the car was?
It was white.
All right. Do you recall anything else about the physical characteristics of the car?
It had markings on it, similar to what a lot of the Gwinnett County police cars have. They have like a decal that goes across, so that you can kind of see it shining out. I mean, you can see it a little ways away. It's almost fluorescent.
Do you recall whether or not the headlights were on in the vehicle?
The headlights were on the car.
Did you notice, were you in a position to notice, or did you notice whether or not there was anybody inside that police car as you went by?
Yes, there was a person in there.
All right. Could you say whether it was a male or a female?
It appeared to be a male, but I did not look closely.
Did you notice any other vehicles around?
No.
These sightings of the police car coming between 9 and 11 o'clock on April 15th, 1993. That's about the time of the killing. And Robert Brucey is a veterinarian down in Gwinnett County. He too drove past the Gwynco muffler shop, and here he tells the jury what he saw.
Did you see anything when you got to Gwynco muffler shop?
What I'd noticed is a police car in the driveway.
Now, if you would, describe for the jury in as much detail as you can what the car looked like and what you saw as you came out there.
I was heading north on Peachtree Industrial on my way home, and there's a speed zone there where it goes from 55 to 45, and when my lights hit the side of the police car, and I slowed down to so I wasn't breaking the speed limit. And
you have to slow down a good bit?
Yeah, it's hard. My radar detector was on, and it did not go off, and it was a Gwinnett County police car, and there was a fella in it wearing a white T-shirt.
Okay. When you say there was a fellow in it, was it a white male, black male, what race did it?
White male.
White male?
Yes, sir.
And what physical characteristics were you able to notice about this white man?
Dark brown hair and fairly big fella, big-shouldered fella, because you could, he had a T-shirt on.
Well, that somewhat vague description does match what the defendant in this case looks like. We'll be back in a moment to talk a little bit about this day one of the case of Georgia versus Michael Chappell, how it is shaking out and how it looks in this death penalty case from Georgia. Or do you have to think at times about credibility in the punishment phase?
Because the punishment phase would require you to put on, in essence, possibly a different face. You're saying I didn't do it, but if you get to the penalty phase, if you don't need to do the about phase, you say, well, I did it, but please don't kill me because I have mitigating circumstances with regard to it. So it becomes a difficult choice. Often the choice of the defendant testifying is put in a completely different light, because the defendant that gets up during the guilt phase says something that is not consistent with mitigation. They find him guilty. He's left with nothing to say at the penalty phase. So that critical decision with regard to the defendant is but one example of how one has to choose the challenge to different pieces of evidence along the way.
And we're ways away from that phase in the case. Obviously, we're day one of the guilt phase with a police officer on trial. Talk a little bit about how this might play in the courtroom and what the cost for the community is to go through something like this. These are sequestered jurors because of the notoriety of this case in Gwinnett County.
You know, citizens believe and wish to believe that their police officers have sworn a duty and uphold that duty. And the tragedy of these types of cases is that the vast, vast, vast majority of police officers generally uphold that duty. This is a catharsis for the system, that they realize that there is that, as you mentioned before, these are human institutions that are not perfect, and that the community needs to go through, has to examine these. That's why prosecutors vigorously have to prosecute when police, those who are most trusted, wind up breaking the law. And this, of course, is the most egregious example. This isn't just a simple pilfer or something, or something to suggest that this is the taking of a life. One can't even fathom how someone sworn to uphold and serve and protect could go to that length. And that becomes a troubling experience for this jury and for a system to examine.
Well put, Brian Neary, as always. Thanks for joining us tonight on both the cases, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Terry.
Well, that concludes our program. For all of us here at Primetime Justice, thanks for watching tonight. Good.
To the best of your knowledge.
Something I have to live with? Yes.
Let me ask you, the photograph of the person contained in Defense Exhibit number 38,
Yes.
is that the person who was driving the car that night?
Good similarity.
But is it the person?
I can't be sure.
Is the Defense Exhibit number 31 the person who was driving the car that night?
No, that's not J.P. Morgan.
Is that person? Is that the person who was driving the car that night?
To my knowledge, yes.
That's all the questions I have.
Court TV's Jane Okersinski is covering this trial for us, and she joins us now from Georgia. Jane, that kind of identification in the courtroom, very powerful, very dramatic. Is the defense able to shake it at all?
Well, actually, the prosecutor shook it in that little excerpt we heard. Number 38 that he referred to, that the witness said he couldn't be sure was not the man in the car, is not Michael Chappell.
Now, there have been a lot of witnesses in this case, Jane, who may not have seen the defendant or someone they saw was the defendant, but certainly saw a police car at the scene of the crime. But there have been some contradictions in their testimony. How's that worked?
Well, there's, you know, as you would expect from a wide range of people, all of whom drove past this point at various times within maybe a half an hour span, there are differences. There are differences in where they placed the car. There are differences in lots of things, on what lights were on, one thing and another. But the truly interesting thing is, while all of them say that they saw a police car in that driveway, on cross-examination, the defense shows them a photo array of a variety of police cars that were on the road in Gwinnett County in April of 1993, and they asked them to pick out the one that looks the most like the car they saw. Every witness we've heard so far has picked a police car other than the type of car Michael Chappell was driving.
Well, that is a clever defense tactic there. We're just taking a look at this lineup. It seems like there are a lot of different kinds of police cars. Are there that many different law enforcement agencies in and around Gwinnett County?
Well, there are, and there were about 3 different Gwinnett County police cars on the road at that time. And as the defense pointed out in their opening statement, all 200 or so police officers who worked for the Gwinnett Police Department took their cars home. So they each had access to their patrol car 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And of course, the defense is building the theory that while this crime may very well have been committed by a police officer, it wasn't necessarily their police officer.
You know, Jane, as you've told us, this is a very high-profile case in that area. The jurors have been sequestered. Talk a little bit about the tone of the proceedings in a case that is being this closely watched by that community and that is being televised.
Well, it's very interesting to me that the tone of the prosecution has been very methodical, very deliberate, given the speed with which they are moving, and not at all emotional. You are not seeing a lot of fireworks in this trial. You are not seeing a lot of great dramatics from the prosecution. And I think that's a very considered thing.
All right, Jane, thanks for that report. Well, the trial of Michael Chappell presents a painful civic issue: police crime. Confidence in the nation's police forces is critical to the safety of our streets and the overall health of our communities. Recently, that confidence has been shaken. The beating of Rodney King in Los Angeles, the killing of Malice Green in Detroit, and now in the O.J. Simpson trial, the possibility that a 20-year veteran of the LAPD will be heard on tape uttering vicious racist views and boasting about breaking the law. All these incidents and more pose the hard question: Who will guard the guardians? Well, to help us answer it, Arthur Miller joins us from the Harvard Law School and Court TV's In Context. Arthur, you know, we spotlight police crime in probably an unfair fashion, but what does it tell us, do you think, as we look at the two examples that we're seeing now in the two cases we're covering, the Michael Chappell case, he's innocent until proved guilty, obviously, but charged of a murder, and the Mark Fuhrman issues?
It tells us we are in a period of very, very close scrutiny of law enforcement. This is not a new phenomenon, Terry. Periodically, over time, you get the inevitable police corruption inquiries, whether it's the Knapp Commission or the Mullen Commission or the Christopher Commission that looked into the affairs in Los Angeles following Rodney King. It's almost as if it's a roller coaster, periods of rather peaceful treatment of the police, and then periods of very sharp inquiry as to police behavior.
And we are perhaps in one of those periods where the police are getting very close scrutiny. But when we were talking a little bit earlier, you drew this distinction in kinds of police crime.
Yes, we tend to think of the bad cop, the rogue cop, the cop who crosses the thin blue line. We have all of those metaphors. Very rarely do we step back and realize that police misbehavior takes a variety of forms. For example, Chappell down in Georgia, if he did the murder, we're talking about a criminal, no different from any other criminal. If we're talking about Mark Fuhrman, assuming that the tapes say what they say, if we're talking about a racist, bigoted cop who probably violated the law, but notice he violated the law not to steal money for himself, he violated the law to achieve a law enforcement objective. The same is true when you beat a confession. You're not a criminal in the sense of privately profiting. You're a criminal in the sense of violating constitutional norms. But that raises more of a question, does the end, getting the confession, justify the means? That's a tougher one.
And raises the question, maybe there are times when we don't want to look too closely at the men and women who put their lives on the line in very difficult situations, in real life tough situations, and we don't want to really know how they keep the law and order.
There's no doubt about that. In an era such as the one we live in right now, there are communities. They tend to be the suburban communities, the middle-class communities, the wealthy communities, who just want the job done. They want to be safe at night. Conversely, there are other communities in the inner cities who live with police brutality and police excess, and they want the spotlight to be shown on these practices. So a lot depends on who you are and what's good for you in terms of how you react to this.
And the spotlight can distort what is really happening. How serious a problem do you think we're talking about here? How widespread?
I think there has always been a criminal element within the police force. I think there has always been a vigilante element within the police force. I think there's always been an element that is willing to break the Constitution to achieve the objective. But everything I know about law enforcement suggests that it is not a majority, it is a small minority, but we live in a world in which we have these high-profile cases, we have court TV, we have the media of mass communication, we have home video cams, and we just get it pushed in our faces, and maybe it's more the anecdote than the rule.
Well, given that distortion of reality, what's going on In Context?
Well, you make me feel obsolete now, Terry, because we are this evening going to talk about police misconduct and the phenomenon, the reality of the phenomenon, the causes of it, the stresses on cops, how lawyers both for police and against police handle the cases. And we're very privileged tonight to have the former police commissioner of the city of New York, Ray Kelly, one of the nation's great cops, to join us and talk about these things.
It's a really important issue, and it sounds like a good program. Thanks, Arthur. Well, we're going to take a break right now. You can see that program In Context right up after Primetime Justice tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern. After this commercial break, we're going to turn...
Seeing the newspaper article in the paper is what prompted you to go to the district attorney. That was my question.
It said in the newspaper that the money, the murder weapon, and the money had never been recovered. And at that point in time, I thought, you know, I did a lot of soul searching. It was going to be more important to come in and let everybody know about the money than it was, you know, to sit back and not say anything about it. Up until that point in time, I assumed the money had been
Mr.
recovered.
Curtis, if I could just ask you to answer my questions. You're certainly allowed to explain the answer, but if you could focus on the questions that I asked you, I would appreciate it.
I believe I did.
Okay. My question to you was that seeing the newspaper article is the first time that you went to the district attorney's office?
Yes, it was.
Yes or no? Okay,
Mhm.
yes it was. And that was in February of this past year. Isn't that correct?
January, I believe.
1995.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was 95 because of...
It was this year, the year we're still in.
The
It's
reason I know it was
1995.
very near New Year's.
Okay.
But it was after the New Year.
And that was almost 2 years after the events that you have described for us this morning.
It was a year after the event. Well, 2 summers.
That's 2 years,
This
isn't it?
summer.
The incident that you
Was
have
in
described
93,
was in
April of
April 18th, 1993. Isn't that what you
Right,
testified?
That's correct.
And January of 1995 would be almost 2 years after that. Is that correct?
Almost. A year and a half. Okay, split the difference.
Now, you've testified that the party was at the home of Kirsten Fraser Forg.
Right.
You did not know Kirsten Fraser Forg at the time you
Prior
went to
that
the
night,
party.
no.
You learned her name subsequent to the time
The
you
night
went to
of
the
the
party.
party.
Someone told you her name
Yeah, the
because
night
you
of the
didn't
party.
know who she was. You didn't know any of the girls who were there at the
No.
party, did you?
Prior to it, no.
You did not know Aaron Chappell.
Not prior to the party, no.
You still don't know Aaron Chappell. In fact, you did not know her name at the time.
At what time?
At the time of the party.
I was introduced to her.
Do you remember giving a statement to the district attorney's office when you did
Yeah,
come
she
forward
did.
with your story in January of this year?
Yes.
And you spoke to Mr. Titino
Yes, that is correct.
and Investigator Burnett.
That is correct.
And you told them that the woman you were referring to, in whose purse you allegedly saw this money, was called Carmen.
Right. I was confused with her name. As you said, it was a year and a half, 2 years later. And as a matter of fact, right after I left Jack Burnett in Glenn Titino's office, I was like, it wasn't Carmen, it was Aaron.
You told them in your
yeah.
statement that her name was
I did
Carmen.
say Carmen in the statement, though. That's correct.
Who told you, Mr. Curtis, that her name was Aaron?
I remembered it after I left the office.
Who had told you that her name was Aaron?
At the party, I was introduced to her by several of the people there. She herself said her name was Aaron.
You also said in your statement that it was your understanding that she was Mike Chappell's wife.
At the party, I was introduced to her, and she said she was Aaron Chappell, and she talked about her husband being a police officer in Gwinnett.
But you didn't know who Mike Chappell was.
No.
So at the time of the party, that information really had no meaning for you whatsoever.
Well, Mike, the name Mike Chappell, she was introduced to me as Aaron Chappell.
On redirect examination, the prosecutor showed Kendon Curtis several pictures and had him first describe Aaron Chappell, and then showed him a picture, and in fact Kendon Curtis described a woman who would look very much like Aaron Chappell, Michael Chappell's wife. Ruth Jones, this is almost 50 witnesses that the prosecutors have put on during the course of this week. We've covered a number of criminal cases while the trial of O.J. Simpson has gone on, which have proceeded at a much greater pace. In a sense, in this case, you almost have to say that's to the advantage of the prosecution.
Certainly it is. When a jury is bored and inattentive, certainly since usually it's the prosecution that's trying to present the evidence and the defense is trying to chip away at that evidence, the prosecution loses an opportunity to actually convince the jury. One of the things when we talk about the theater of cases is that you have to get the evidence in, but it doesn't do any good unless the jury is paying attention. So to the extent, particularly in a circumstantial evidence case, what makes circumstantial evidence so compelling is you put on piece after piece after piece, and finally it becomes so overwhelming that a jury says it has to be guilt because there's no other reasonable explanation. But if you take too long to put in the pieces, they lose the compelling relationship between all of the various pieces of evidence.
And that's what we've seen in this case. The prosecutor beginning with the evidence of eyewitnesses, going to the financial motive evidence, and when we come back we're going to hear the testimony about the circle closing around Michael Chappell as a suspect as one of his former colleagues, Captain Davis, takes the witness stand to talk about his investigation of the killing of Emma Jean Thompson.
Conversation with Mike Chappell at the Northside Precinct.
Yes, I did. This was on the Tuesday night, I believe the 20th.
And can you describe for the jury the conversation you had with Mike Chappell on the 20th? Where did it take place, first of all?
Well, I had gone to the precinct to make a telephone call. And after I had completed the phone call, I came back through the assembly room there, and Mike was at what we call the forums cabinet. And he walked on outside the precinct out to the back there with me. And we had just a general conversation, you know, about his family and about an older truck that he had bought and how he was getting along. And he brought up the homicide case and asked me how it was going. And I asked him what he thought about it. He said that he thought it might be some druggers, or he'd heard that it might be some druggers, or Emma Jean's son, or the Sugar Hill deputy that they had there, the Sugar Hill marshal. And I asked him, well, who do you think it might be? And he says, well, I don't know, but I have an alibi. I was at the precinct there in the fire station with Brewster, who is Sergeant Donald Stone, and Officer Brian Reddy. And I think he said that he was huddled up with the firemen because it was a rainy night that night, and they were watching the weather station and all to see about the weather.
And did he volunteer this information to you?
Yes.
Did you ask him any questions in regard to that?
The only question I asked was, what do you think about, you know, who do you think the officer might be?
And Michael Chappell's response, I have an alibi, strikes the prosecution as mighty suspicious. Well, on cross-examination, Johnny Moore pursues the subject.
Now, the same day that you talked to Mike up there about, he told you he thought it might be some druggers or her son or something like that. You had a conversation with Sergeant Stone too, didn't you?
That's correct.
Okay. And Sergeant Stone told you that Mike was with him at the fire station until 10 or 10:15 that night, didn't he?
That's correct.
And this was on April the 20th, 1993.
That's correct.
That was 4 days after the crime.
It was on Tuesday night, yes.
Okay, the discovery of the crime. So Sergeant Stone's memory would likely have been fresher then than it was later, wouldn't it? 4 days after the crime?
It possibly, yes.
Okay. That's the reason you took the statement, wasn't it? Because he told you a time and you wrote it down to preserve that, what he told you.
The reason I wrote the statement, you know, again, I didn't ask him the question, you know, and we were talking about his family and things of that nature, and he questioned me about the homicide. I asked him, you know, what he thought. When I asked him who he thought the officer might be, and he came out with the, well, I have an alibi. To me, that was significant. Also, if you'll notice on the form that I wrote, it's not a regular supplement sheet that we use. I thought it was so significant at the time that when I left the precinct, I immediately pulled over and wrote that down so I could be as clear with it as I could possibly be, because I thought that it was significant that he would offer a statement like that. That's not something that I have heard from other policemen that I have dealt with when you ask them questions to say, you know, use the terminology that I have an alibi.
Okay. Now, when you talked with Sergeant Stone, did he volunteer the times to you too, or did you question him?
I asked Sergeant Stone about that because when he had said that he was there, I went in to see what Sergeant Stone said, because Sergeant Stone was there at the time.
Okay, and you thought what Sergeant Stone told you was significant too, so you wrote it down also?
Yes, I did.
And
because he gave a specific time, and I felt like that it was necessary that we, you know, when he gives that time, that I should record it. And then I recorded as correctly and accurately as I could, as quickly as possible.
Right.
Well, it's one of the unusual circumstances of this case that the witnesses and the defendant were colleagues on the Gwinnett County Police Force. When we come back, we're going to hear one of the more difficult circumstances in any police department, an interviewing and interrogation of one of their own, Michael Chappell, facing the grilling of his colleagues about the killing of Emma Jean Thompson. Emma Jean Thompson was found shot to death in her car. Michael Chappell was called into the interview room at the Gwinnett County Police Department, sat down and questioned by his colleagues. We now hear from Lieutenant Joe. We are going to hear some of this videotape, which was played in its entirety just about for jurors today. 5 hours of this. It was a standoff, basically, very emotional at times. Lieutenant John Laddie was called in to question Michael Chappell. He and Chappell had no work that they'd done together. And in this section, we're going to hear Laddie try to put the case, the evidence that had been amassed already at that stage against Michael Chappell in an effort to break him and to get him to confess something he did not do. Something he does to this day is maintain his innocence.
You are looking at a murder charge, Mike. I realize. Armed robbery, murder. What can I say? Tell the truth. That is the truth, Lieutenant. Listen, this woman, it's absolutely unfathomable to us that this could have happened this way. When this information started coming to us, there's no way we wanted to believe it. We said, you know, there's some officer up there, he's writing a report, you know, it's routine, he just doesn't know about it. He hasn't come forward to tell us because he doesn't realize it's relevant. He may not realize that's where the murder occurred, depending on who it was. We've been looking for this officer. We've checked not only this department, we've checked all the other departments, the sheriff's department. We've even checked Hall County, wanting to find the police officer that was in that patrol car at that location that night at the time that this woman was killed, or right there at it. You see what I'm saying? That officer has not been found. He has not been identified. He has not come forward. There's only one reason why that he would not come forward, Mike, because he committed that crime. But let me explain to you. Let me explain something to you. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. None of us wanted to believe that you could have been there, that you could have done this. And we kept trying to leave that door open, say it couldn't be the Mike Chappell we all know, respect, and love. It couldn't be. Mike Chappell couldn't have done this. But every time we tried to deny it and say no, you know, we tried to close that door on you. We didn't ever want to get to the point of having to talk to you about it anymore. We already had done. We had no choice. Something else came up. We kept doing that road check up there, hoping something else was going to come up. We couldn't account for you anywhere else. We've tried. We can't account for you anywhere else. And then, lo and behold, today you're picked out of the photo lineup. We need to know why, how.
Lieutenant, I did not kill no one. I told you everything I know about the situation. Granted, it's fucked up. I don't know what else to tell you. That's the truth. I don't know what to tell you now. But
Mike, could it be that you're arranged to meet with her there to discuss this case further, that she reacted to you in some kind of violent or threatening way. You panicked, you've trained, you've been in the Marine Corps, you've been trained year after year, you've been on the SWAT team, you've prepared all of your life has been spent in preparation of your physical abilities, the ability to defend yourself, the ability to defend other people, the ability to enforce the law. Could it have been that something got out of hand right there? And you reacted because she did something threatening, or you thought you were being threatened, and then you said, my gosh, my God, I don't think I can explain this. I mean, nobody wants to believe that you go up there and kill this woman to rob her. Of course.
I don't know what to say. I didn't do it. I wasn't there. I wasn't there.
And that is the position that to this day Michael Chappell maintains. He did not do this, and over almost 5 hours of this videotaped interview, despite a grueling interrogation by Lieutenant Laddie and one of his best friends on the force, he never broke. He did not admit doing anything in this case. He didn't kill Emma Jean Thompson, is what he said. When we come back, we'll discuss the impact of this videotape. The jurors hearing the defendant's own words at length on tape denying committing the crime, and it was the prosecution which put that into evidence. Ruth Jones, we've seen a couple of snippets of this tape, partly because of the quality of the sound, but you think that this is a real risk for the prosecutors?
Yes, indeed, because it really has opened the door for the defendant not to take the witness stand. His statement really is before the jury, and the defense can make whatever arguments they want, they can order whatever other evidence they need to support his alibi without having him take the risk of going through a grueling cross-examination. So we need to hear later, perhaps in summation, what the prosecution think they got out of this tape, and see if it weighs against the notion that it may have forced the defendant to be able to sit in his chair and not take the stand.
You know, we've had some response from viewers as we cover this trial. Understandably, some police officers concerned that we always spotlight police misconduct, and with the Furman case, the Furman issue in the O.J. Simpson case, and this trial, I wonder, as your experience, how serious a problem are we looking at when we talk about police crime?
Well, I think police crime is serious not just in the acts that they commit, but the concern that perhaps your phone callers raise is why, in fact, it is so serious. When a police officer is put on trial, it not only impacts on the public's perception of that individual, but it impacts on the perception of police officers, their credibility as witnesses in other cases, and their credibility in the community. If people continually see that police are not only put on the witness stand, but that other police don't turn them in, it really does harm their public perception as law enforcement officers.
And is there a necessity for greater grip on the management of some police departments, do you think?
Well, certainly to the extent that a police department and their management on every level send the message to the public that they are willing to root out any corrupt or bad cops, because they realize that bad cops not only misserve the public, but it misserves the profession. It really does send the right message.
All right, Ruth Jones, it's always great having you with us once again tonight, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Well,
hangar that day.
Yes, there was one.
And who recovered that?
I did.
Who found the item, do you recall?
I believe Technician Graham found it.
And where was that located inside the vehicle?
It was on the passenger floorboard in the front.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 103. I would ask you if you can identify this item and the contents therein.
Yes, this is the projectile that I recovered on 416.
Mr. Smith, why don't you mark that or its container as a separate exhibit so that if it's examined, passed around, or whatever, if it gets lost out of the bag, we all gonna wonder where it goes.
Yes, sir.
We appreciate the opportunity to see it. Oh, I can show it too.
Your Honor, I'd ask the record to reflect that State's Exhibit 103 was a paper bag. I would ask at this time that a second paper bag contained therein be marked as State's Exhibit 104, that a plastic bag contained therein be marked as State's Exhibit 105, and that a canister containing a projectile be identified as State's 106.
All right, go ahead, please.
Technician White, once again, I'm handing you what's been marked now as State's Exhibit 106. Can you identify that item?
Yes, this is the projectile that I recovered on 4/16/93.
That appears to be contained in some type of small plastic container?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Correct.
And can you identify State's Exhibit 105?
This is a plastic evidence bag. It has my handwriting on it, and this is what I had put the canister down in prior to transporting it to the crime lab.
When did you transport that item to the crime lab, ma'am?
I took it down there on 4/19/93.
And between the recovery date of 4/16/93 and the time you transported it to the crime lab on 4/19/93, where was that item kept, if you know?
It was locked and sealed in one of our old holding cells.
Was that a holding cell that the crime scene technician unit utilizes?
Yes, there's 6 of them.
And did you yourself transport that item to the crime lab?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall who you turned that item over to at the crime lab?
I gave it to Kelly Fight.
During the time that projectile was in your custody and control, did you do anything to it to alter its condition?
No, I didn't.
Directing your attention to 4/20 of 1993, did you again have occasion to examine the victim, Imogene Thompson's vehicle?
Yes, I did.
What was the purpose of that examination?
We were looking for another projectile.
Had you discussed the case with the lead investigator, Jack Burnett, at that time?
Yes, I had.
And did he instruct you to look for a second projectile?
Yes, he did.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask that a brown paper bag be marked as the next State's exhibit, that's 107. That a second paper bag be marked as State's 108. That a third brown paper bag with writing on it be marked as State's 109. And that a plastic container be marked as State's 110.
All right. Defense Counsel Seaman.
Technician White, I'm handing you what's been previously marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 110. Can you identify that item, please?
Yes, this is the projectile that I recovered from Ms. Thompson's vehicle on 4/20/93.
Does it have your writing on it?
Yes, it does.
And is that projectile also contained within a small plastic container?
Yes, it is.
I'm showing you what's been marked as State's 109. Can you identify that item, please?
Yes, this is the paper bag that I put the canister in, and this is my handwriting.
Where was that item found, ma'am?
It was found underneath the front passenger seat. I actually had to remove the seat in order to find it.
How did you remove the seat?
I used ratchets and undid all the bolts and things, and we pulled it out. When I flipped it over, the seat has a small lip on the front, and when I flipped it over, the projectile was laying there.
And you recovered that item at that time?
Yes, I did.
And what did you do with it?
I took it up to the crime scene unit, bagged it, and took it to the property room.
During the time that item, that projectile was in your possession, did you do anything to alter its condition?
No, I didn't.
Directing your attention, ma'am, to April the 29th of 1993, did you have an occasion to examine a Gwinnett County Police Vehicle number 197?
Yes, I did.
I'm showing you what's been previously marked and admitted as State's Exhibit 75. Can you identify that photograph?
This is a photograph of Gwinnett County Unit 197. I took this photograph myself.
What was the purpose in examining Police Vehicle 197 that day?
We were asked to do some presumptive blood tests and to look for a car wash receipt.
And where was that vehicle when you first saw it on April 29th?
It was parked out at the side of the building in the Detective Division parking lot.
And do you know whether or not it was locked at that time?
It was locked.
And did someone have to obtain a set of keys to open the vehicle?
Yes.
And who did that? Was it yourself or someone else?
No, it was someone else.
Who was it?
Technician Nancy Jenkins.
Were you present when she obtained the keys and opened the vehicle?
I was present when she opened the vehicle, but not when she obtained the keys.
And after the vehicle was opened, what happened next?
Well, we just did a brief search looking for the car wash receipt.
And was that found?
No, it wasn't.
Was anything found at that time?
I found a note on a yellow piece of paper from Sergeant Winderweedle to Officer Chappell asking him to call Imogene Thompson.
Ma'am, I'm handing you what's been previously been marked as State's Exhibit 74. Can you identify that item?
Yes, this is the note that I found that afternoon.
What exhibit number is that?
74, Your Honor. I believe it's been previously been marked and identified. And where was that note found in the car, ma'am?
It was in the pursuit pack, which is a forms holder that fits over the front seat. It has hooks that hook over the seat, and it was found in one of the bottom compartments.
All right. Did you find that item?
Yes, I did.
Does that item today appear to be in the same condition that it was on the 29th of April, 1993?
Yes, it does.
I don't believe that item has been previously been admitted, Your Honor. At this time, we would move to admit State 74.
I show it as being identified but not admitted or offered. You offering it at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
State 74 is admitted without objection. Go ahead, please.
Your Honor, I would ask permission to publish this to the jury. It's just a single item. I don't think it would take long. I'll continue.
Any objection, Mr. Moore?
Your Honor, as long as we don't slow the trial down, we have the same rules for everybody.
All right. Go ahead, please.
Technician White, what was done next with respect to the vehicle?
Technician Jenkins pulled the vehicle around to our old, it was an ambulance shop at that time, and secured it inside. And I went home because the presumptive test that we were going to do has to be done in total darkness.
What time of day was it when you found the note and when Ms. Jenkins moved the car around? Do you recall approximately what time of day it was?
Yes, I found the note a little after 5 p.m. and about 5:30, Technician Jenkins pulled the car around back.
And you've indicated that you left at that time and came back later that day?
That's correct.
Approximately what time did you return to that scene?
We went back down to the ambulance shop around 1950 hours, which is 7:50 p.m.
And describe what you saw when you returned.
This vehicle was pulled inside. We unlocked the door to the shop, went in, and unlocked the vehicle.
Who had the keys at that time?
Technician Jenkins.
She was with you?
Yes, she was.
Were there any other persons present at that time?
No.
Did you find anything else inside the vehicle at that time?
There was a large number of personal items, which we removed after I photographed. Well, I photographed the vehicle and we removed the items.
Just generally, what type of items were removed at that time? Were there any papers
Yes,
within
there
those
were.
items?
Yes.
Or what did you do with respect to those items?
All of the blank forms were separated out. Anything that had any writing on it was put together and put into a bag.
Okay, and what was done with that bag?
Later that evening, it was secured up in a holding cell and then later put in the property room.
Did you inventory those papers and items at that time?
I didn't individually inventory the papers.
What happened next with respect to the vehicle, ma'am?
After I photographed it, I began mixing luminol, which is a presumptive blood test. It needs to mix for a little while and after we mixed it, we turned out the lights and I began spraying the inside of the patrol car. And as soon as I had something glowing, we stopped, and Miss Jenkins got the camera set up so that we could photograph what we were seeing.
If we could digress for just a minute, would you explain to the members of the jury what luminol is and what it is used for in the crime scene context?
Luminol is a presumptive blood test. It glows in the dark in the presence of blood. It's fairly sensitive in that it will react with one part of blood to 1 million parts or up to 1 million parts of another substance.
And is that a liquid?
Yes, it is. It's mixed with distilled water.
And you mixed the item that day?
Yes, it did.
And where was it applied inside the vehicle?
In the front seat of the patrol car.
And did you do that?
Yes, I did.
How did you do it?
I sprayed it on with a spray bottle.
And at that point, were the lights on or off?
They were off.
Was it, describe the darkness, was it totally dark at that time?
Yes, it was.
And where was Technician Jenkins at that time?
She had the camera on a tripod in the passenger door of the patrol car, and I was spraying from the driver's door.
As you can see, Marianne White is a crime scene technician. She's testifying for the state. Earlier, she testified about taking latent fingerprints from inside the car in which Emma Jean Thompson's body was found. She said that there were not enough points or areas of identification to identify who left those prints.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 111. Can you identify that photograph?
Yes, this is a photograph that Technician Jenkins took that night, and it shows the glowing pattern of the luminol spray.
Does that fairly and accurately depict the interior of the car, specifically that car seat area, as you saw it that night?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we would move to admit State's 111.
Any objections to one? Which was that 111? What was that?
That was the
That
photo
was
of the luminol test.
Luminol inside the car.
We'd have no objection.
May I see it, Mr. Smith? State's 111 is admitted without objection. And what was the date that was taken?
April 29th.
429. That's
Thank you.
correct.
Your Honor, I would ask permission to have Technician White come down before the jury and just explain the photograph.
Go ahead, please.
Technician White, let me hold the photograph, and if you could explain what is depicted on this photograph. First of all, what was the position of the camera when this photograph was taken?
Okay, if this were the patrol car, this would be the passenger front door, and Technician Jenkins had set the camera up here. I was on the other side from the driver's door spraying inside the car, and she was holding, I was trying to hold the light shut off with my foot, and she was holding it on this side with her foot.
So the camera was located at the passenger door area?
Right.
And please continue and try, if you can, to explain what this photograph depicts.
It's very faint, but this is the armrest. It has a double armrest that comes down.
If you can maybe back up so those
I'm
jurors
sorry.
there can see as well.
I'm sorry. It has double armrests, one for the passenger side and one for the driver's side, and they were down, and this is what's glowing, and there's a little bit glowing up here on the back of the passenger seat, just on the edge of it.
There appears to be another area glowing off to the edge of this photograph. Can you explain that if you can?
We're not sure what that is. Luminol does react occasionally with metals, and there was something metal in there, but I don't recall having sprayed over that far, but we don't really know what that is.
Please be seated. Technician White, as a result of that luminol test, what was done next?
Next, I did another presumptive blood test called phenolphthalein. It's done as a 3-step test. I don't have to touch the article with the chemicals. I used a piece of filter paper, fold it, and just wipe it across where I had seen the glowing. And then you put 1 drop of alcohol, 1 drop of phenolphthalein, and 1 drop of hydrogen peroxide. If it turns to a pink color within about 3 to 5 seconds, that's considered positive for blood.
Does that test for species of blood or any type of blood?
Any type.
And did it in fact turn pink?
Yes, it did.
Okay. What did you do next?
Next, I removed the passenger seat with the armrest attached. I removed the armrest from the driver's side seat, and we loaded them up. We had pulled a vehicle down, and we loaded them up into a crime scene vehicle to be transported up to the ID section.
Okay. And was the car seat and armrest in fact transported
Yes.
to ID?
Yes, and secured in a holding cell.
And were they secured in the same holding cell that you previously described?
Yes.
At any time when the car seat and armrest were in your possession and control, did you do anything to alter the condition of those, apart from the two tests that you've described, the luminol test and the phenolphthalein?
No.
Your Honor, I would ask that these photographs be identified as the state's next exhibits.
Mr. Moore, have you seen them?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, go ahead, please.
Technician White, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 112. Can you identify that photograph?
This is a photograph of the front seat of Officer Chappell's car, Unit 197. It was taken after I had removed the pursuit pack and personal items, but before we did any testing.
I'm showing you, does that photograph 112 fairly and accurately depict that scene as you saw it on April 29th?
Yes, it does.
I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 113. Can you identify that photograph, please?
This is a photograph of the passenger seat after I had removed it. This was taken the next day on 4/30. This is after the application of the luminol.
Does that fairly and accurately depict how that car seat appeared on that day?
Yes, it does.
I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 114. Can you identify that item?
This is also a photograph of that same passenger seat with the armrest attached, taken up in the ID lab on 4/30.
Does that fairly and accurately depict how that car seat appeared on 4/30 of 1993?
Yes, it does.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 115. Can you identify that photograph, please?
This is a close-up of the armrest that was also taken the very next day on 4/30 up in the ID lab.
Does that fairly and accurately depict how that section of the armrest appeared on 4/30 of 1993?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, there are several items here that I would ask to have it marked at this time.
Go ahead, please.
You can mark this bag, please. Technician White, if you could please come down from the stand. I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 116. Can you identify that item?
Yes, this is the car seat, the passenger side seat with the armrest that I removed from Unit 197.
Is that the seat that you removed on April the 29th of 1993?
That's correct.
Is that the car seat that you did the luminol test on?
Yes, it is.
Is that in the same condition today as it was back on April the 29th, 1993? And I would direct your attention specifically to the left armrest of that seat.
No, there's been some cuttings taken out of it.
Okay. Were those cuttings present when you examined the seat on April 29th, 1993? No. Okay. Apart from those cuttings, is the seat in the same condition as you saw it that day?
It appears to be.
Let me ask, when you say passenger side car seat, that's the seat, the front seat that a passenger would be sitting in the vehicle if you had a passenger, as opposed to the driver in the front seat?
Yeah, it had a split seat.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, please.
I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 119. Can you identify that item?
This is the armrest from the driver's side.
What number is that, Mr. Smith?
That is 119, Your Honor. Okay. And is that in the same condition? It was at the time you removed it on April 29th, 1993?
It appears to be, yes.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 120. Can you identify that item, please?
This is the bag that I had put the armrest in. This has my handwriting.
Okay. Is that the bag that you secured that item in that day?
Yes.
Two other items, ma'am, and I don't believe you'll be able to identify these. Can you identify State's Exhibit 117?
No.
Okay. All right. And can you identify State's Exhibit 118?
No.
What was the seat wrapped in that day?
I wrapped it in brown craft paper, like the white paper, except it was brown.
And where was that item secured?
When we got done that night, I secured it in a holding cell, and on the 30th, I took it out, rephotographed it, and wrapped it, and took it to the property room.
Ma'am, with respect to the photograph that you previously identified as State's Exhibit 111, which you described the glowing luminol on the car seat, what area of the car seat would that depict?
It's this area right in here.
You can be seated. Did you have any further contact with respect to this car seat? Did you do anything other than what you've described to that car seat after April 29, 1993?
No, except to take it to the property room on the 30th.
And the photographs that you have described were taken the following day on April 30th?
That's correct. Your Honor, I would ask that this be marked as the State's next exhibit, and if we could mark them A, B, C, and D.
This is 117, is that correct?
Your Honor, this is 121 A, B, C, and D.
Oh, okay, okay, thank you. Yes.
Again, we're watching the continued testimony of the crime scene technician. She is testifying about a lot of the physical evidence that the prosecution says links this defendant to the crime, the murder of Emma Jean Thompson. She has testified that the car which the defendant drove, his squad car, was tested for blood. There was luminol testing done, which shows where trace evidence of blood was found, and according to this witness, it was found on both the driver's side armrest in his squad car, as well as the passenger side seat. And let's talk for a moment with Eva Poland. What do you make of that? What do you make of the blood on the passenger side rather than on the driver's side?
Well, as a prosecutor, we have to come up with a theory for why there would be blood. This isn't a stabbing where it's likely that the person who committed the crime would be covered with blood. It's a shooting. It's less likely then that the